Come on over here. Come on over here. Come on. Come on, let's visit. Yeah. Oh, fine-looking critters.
Raccoon has a bushy tail. Possum tail is bare. Bunny has no tail at all, just a bunch of hair. Boil that cabbage down, turn them hoe cakes brown. The only song I can sing is boil that cabbage down.
Hi, sweetness. How's my precious? Who's my buddy? Who's my pal? Come on, sweetie. Oh, that's my puppy.
I always had a really deep connection and love for animals, bringing them stray dogs and cats, and always wanting to be near animals and around animals. Frankly, that's something I've seen a lot of kids.
That's the goat, right?
That's our goat.
That's our goat, oh, okay. And that's a cow?
The cow. It's a goat.
Cow and the goat, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, you made a couple of friends.
This is Fry. As you can see, he's all skinny and he's scraggly and he walks like the hunchback in Notre Dame, but to us, he's the most beautiful man in the world. Even though you have buck teeth. I have buck teeth too. Yes, I do. He touches so many hearts here, because I think when people see an animal that has clearly been so abused and neglected to the point where he's had permanent disfigurement, and then they see his spirit, he has such love, and he offers such love to people. The Humane Society that we worked with on this case found him locked into a dark, filthy stall. His hoofs were overgrown by this, and what had happened was they had never trimmed his hoofs. So over the months, maybe even years, the ligaments had contracted. And when we found Frey, he was crawling. He would get around by crawling on his front legs. If they had just taken 5 minutes and trimmed his hoofs, he wouldn't be crippled for life. That's all it would have taken. But because they didn't even care enough to do that, he's crippled now.
Lori is very hurt when she sees animals being hurt, and that was one of the first things I noticed about her. She sensitized me to a large extent to animal issues and actually reconnected me to some of my childhood memories and childhood feelings about animals.
Very gently. Hold your hand out.
I think we are compassionate beings.
Oh.
Very good.
Kevin says thank you.
Yes, thank you, cow.
I think sadly we live in a society that then starts chipping away at that. And by the time you're 10 or 11, it's like, oh, well, if you like animals, you're weird. Or God forbid, you stop eating them, you're even weirder. And most kids, understandably, can't deal with that family pressure, that peer pressure, that societal pressure. And it's easier just to conform.
Most people don't think about the way farm animals are raised. They don't think about where meat, milk, and eggs come from. And when Lori and I started Farm Sanctuary back in 1986, neither of us had a whole lot of experience with how farm animals are treated at farms, at stockyards, at slaughterhouses. And so we started visiting those places.
This is one of our roos that was rescued from the hatcheries. He's an egg-type chicken, which means that because he's male, he was discarded.
When we visited a hatchery, we found a dumpster full of unwanted chicks behind the hatchery. As we approached it, we heard chirping, we heard critters moving around in there, and as we came up on it, we saw hundreds of baby chicks that were stumbling on top of each other. In some cases, there were eggs there that weren't quite hatched, and they were actually hatching in the dumpster. These are the unwanted discards of the egg industry.
Because these chickens have been genetically altered to be very small and be heavy egg producers, the males are of no use because they don't lay eggs and they don't grow fast enough for meat production, so they're literally thrown out. And we're talking about 250 million unwanted male chicks.
It's never going to be possible for us or any sanctuary to rescue all of the farm animals who need to be rescued. So the individuals who come here become the ambassadors for the other members of their species who were not so lucky.
No, don't chew the chair.
This is Jack. He's our fastest pig in the barn. And behind him is Herbie. And this is Chris.
I met Chris probably 2 years ago. He was just a little guy. He was probably 6 months old. And I came here and sat down, and he crawled right on my lap. And I said, I love this boy. I'm adopting him. So he's been my adopted pig ever since. And I just love him. He doesn't realize that I'm his adopted mother, but I know.
When people come and visit, they get a chance to look into the animal's eyes and to recognize that they're living, feeling animals, and that their hearts beat just like our hearts beat, and that they want to enjoy life, and they don't want to be in pain.
All right, there you go. When I was a child, I went through a long period of feeling very alienated and disconnected and going through some depression. And I think that on a lot of levels that I primarily started associating with animals because I always felt that they were kind of alienated and disconnected in terms of the way I've seen people treat them, you know, starting with dogs and people being mean to dogs, or cats being just thrown out onto the streets. And I think that kind of raised a consciousness in me. Hi, Cal. How are you? I teach and do an after-school program where I work with children, and no one talks to them about those things. How'd you get so big? We don't even talk to them about human compassion, let alone animal compassion. And it's very sad because you have these young children who you feel like, well, you know, if you rear them right and you teach them well and you help them learn respect, maybe we'd be more peaceful. Maybe we could see something different.
I come up to visit a couple times a year. It's such a healing place for me. I mean, I grew up in a family of farmers, and I was taught as a child what I suppose every farm kid gets is that they're there for our use. It's part of a natural cycle of birth and death, and they sustain us through that cycle. And I, of course, bought into it. I had to. It was just a matter of, you know, being a farm kid. But there was something in the back of my mind that didn't make sense. It didn't feel right about it. Because we had pets too. We had dogs and cats. And I was very attached to my dogs. And it was like we were best buddies, did everything together. But the farm animals were different. And it was okay to feel bad about it. My mom taught me that. It was okay to feel bad about animals, you know, killing animals to eat. But don't let it show. You don't let it show. You keep it inside. I'd have friends who took livestock to county fairs. And I realized I wasn't alone, because even these kids too, they cried when they auctioned off their, prize cow at the end of the fair. So I thought, I'm not so weird, but you could never get anybody to talk about it. You never talked about how you felt about your animal. At least not when the tears are flowing. You could, when you're young, that young, you might say, yeah, I really like my cow. Or my goat or my sheep or whatever, or my hog, but you never, that was it. You said it once, kept the stuff upper lip, and you moved on. I mean, the last thing you ever want to be is weak. Weak farmers don't survive.
13, 1-3. My mistake, 14, 14, 1-4, 1-4. Well, that was 1-4, 14, 1-4.
The stockyard should be up here, just about 2 miles on the right is what I've been told, so hopefully we'll see it soon. It's a livestock market where animals are bought and sold. Animals come in from farms throughout the area, and there's a variety of buyers who come here to buy animals. Many of them are slaughterhouses that buy these animals to be slaughtered.
Hey, smartass, come taking pictures of me? I'm taking. You don't have to take. Don't take pictures of me, mister.
I'm taking pictures of the pig.
I'm chasing the pig.
Okay, I've got the pig now, and you're not near him.
One of the times I was taking pictures and Jean was taking video footage, and we were standing there watching them unload a whole truckload of goats. And as there was about this much gap between the stockyard wall where they were unloading in the truck, and one goat started to climb towards me, whether he saw me or whatever, and we made eye contact, and he was trying to escape from the stockyard, and he was trying to come towards me, and then and all this lasted probably a minute, and it felt like an hour. And then the guy just grabbed the goat. And I said, honey, I've got to go in there and get that goat. And we went up to the stockyard to walk around, and we were walking all through. And it is just a prison. And you see these animals being kicked and beaten and shocked with electric shockers, and you see these people screaming at them. And they're terrified. And that was the first time I saw really an animal terrified. I've seen animals scared and hurt, when you grow up with dogs and cats, but really terrified.
Oftentimes, the animals arrive at the stockyard or slaughterhouse and they're too sick, too weak to walk. And they are commonly left to die.
These are images that never fully go away. And that little goat looking at me and making that eye contact, and I couldn't help him. You just turn that sorrow into action. And for me, it was just saving one. Just saving one helped me cope.
Hilda was the first animal we found at a stockyard in Pennsylvania. She was on a pile of dead animals.
And we took out our camera to take a picture of this dead pile. And when the click of the camera went, she heard it and lifted her head.
And we couldn't leave her there, so we picked her off the dead pile, thinking she'd have to be euthanized. Took her to the veterinarian. He started poking around and prodding and whatnot, and she stood up within about 20 minutes. We took her home and took care of her and watched her get healthier. And then she had a friend Jelly Bean that they used to hang out together, and we really didn't know what this was going to become.
Picture this: we're in the middle of Wilmington, Delaware, which is a eastern city with a row house stacked on top of each other. I mean, it's concrete, concrete, concrete. And here we were bringing in pigs and sheep and so forth. And before long, needless to say, we became quite the attraction in the neighborhood.
As we were caring for these sheep and cows and chickens in the backyard, neighborhood kids would come by and they'd peer over the fence. And they would be very curious about the animals. And they would ask us questions. Well, what kind of animals do you have today? So we would bring them in and talk to them about where the animals came from. And it's possible that that was the first time these kids had seen animals, especially farm animals, in any sort of a positive context. Here are these people that are actually rescuing turkeys and letting them live. What a strange concept. And these kids would come and they would just be enthralled by it. And then it was clear that people were interested in learning about these animals and getting in touch with them in a different way.
I think I'd be through there by now, wouldn't you? Hadn't count on these being rusty and dull. Let me pull it up this way a little bit. I had known Gene and Laurie for some time, and we always kidded each other about the farm boy thing, farm boy background. They said, when we get the new place, you've got to come up and help us build fence. And I remember coming up here and stayed a week one time. They just had the house and they had the land, and we were trying to get in fencing as quickly as possible so they could move their animals. I was born and raised in rural Missouri, and it seems amazing that it happened within my lifetime. I don't feel that old, but when I was a kid, we farmed with a team of horses, for God's sake. And a lot of our neighbors still didn't have electricity. And for the first few years when I was a kid on the farm, we didn't even have an electric stove. My mom cooked on a wood stove in the kitchen. It seems really primitive, but that's the way it was in the 40s. It was the last decade and a half of that old-fashioned family farming, where the neighbors pitched in and shocked the wheat and did the threshing and did everything together. So then by the 50s, as post-war affluence begins to set in, good. So far, so good. The farms have electrification, they have refrigerated milk coolers, they have lights in the barn, they have tractors, they have machines. And that really broke up that old-fashioned neighborhood, labor-intensive farming. The neighbors didn't come over and help with the harvest anymore. It was like every man for himself. So, in my youth, as a young kid and a teenager, I witnessed this tremendous revolution on the farm. The end of a way of farming and the onset of factory farming. You drive through farm country today, you just don't see flocks of birds. You don't see turkeys, you don't see chickens, you don't see pigs. If you see cattle, it's only fleetingly, and it's not a very typical farm. So the farm animals have largely disappeared from view because of factory farming. My very first exposure to a factory farm was a big battery egg building. 60,000, 70,000 layer hens in cages, 5 and 6 to a cage, stacked up 3 and 4 levels high, rows of cages as far as the eye can see. But you really can't fully sense the horror of a factory farm unless you can smell it. You can hardly breathe in there. And the gases are like methane, hydrogen sulfide, and some of those can be toxic.
and the darkness in these places. You see, in a factory farm, they only have the lights on when they have to feed the animals or do something in the buildings. Most of the time, those animals are in the dark, packed in there like sardines. Smelling those smells, hearing those sounds, seeing those sights, I was shocked. I had had this experience as a farm kid, chickens outdoors, pecking the worms and the bugs, cattle coming and going from the barn to the fields, pigs living in the mud hole. But the whole theory of factory farming is to put all that inside, feed them and water them by machines, remove the waste by machines, and that way you don't have to use hired help. That makes it cheaper. It makes it possible to have larger numbers of animals. You know, like we could only milk 15 or 16 cows by hand. Well, if you had 15 or 16 cows today, you could make a living. So the farmer has 500 cows or 1,000 cows. And the cows don't get to go very far. They don't want them to leave the barn and go run out in the pasture all day. They want them to stay right close because they're going to milk them again in a few hours. So they keep them in a concrete paddock. In some places in the Southwest, there is no pasture. The cows really sort of live in the milking barn all the time, year-round. So when we say factory farming, we're talking about the application of industrial techniques, which is mass production and labor reduction.
As soon as animals are being used as economic units, and they're used as economic units in small farms too, we have a concern that their well-being will become secondary or even further down the list.
And this is a little girl who was rescued from an egg factory. And the reason they're debeaked, and that's literally chopping off their beaks, is because they're very territorial, like most other animals and humans. And they establish their territory by pecking. Well, in nature, they would peck and run off and nobody would get hurt. But when they're confined in cages, they can't escape each other. And they would peck each other to death. So rather than reduce the crowding, the egg industry just chops off their beaks. And of course, it's extremely painful. Many birds die from the procedure, and the beaks never grow back. And when we find and rescue the laying hens, because they're in these battered cages for a year, sometimes 2 years, generally they've lost 75% of their feathering and have bruises and red sores all over their body. And yet, animals that have been denied any natural behavioral needs, the day after they come here, they're nesting, they make little nests, and they stretch out in the sun. They love to sunbathe, and it's like for the first time you can almost hear them going, oh yeah. They stretch out their wings, and they like to do dust baths where they go into the dirt and kick up dirt around them to help control lice. And they start walking really tentatively at first, and pretty soon they're booking around the farmyard, and they take these steps almost like this. They actually, if you see a laying hen rescue, they will go like this and like this because they don't know how to walk. It's one of those ironic things, again, where it warms your heart to see them do that, and it also hits you in the gut because you realize when they're in these cages, they want to do that. They never forget how to be a chicken.
Most animals arrive really scared of people. They don't know much about compassion and humans. They see a person and they think, oh, what's going to happen to me now? They all hear it. Oh, it's my favorite. I do caregiving here, and it's really neat to see that transformation. They learn to trust us, that we're not going to hurt them. You're a water hog.
Yeah, you're the luckiest pigs on the face of the planet. Yeah, come on over here. I'll give you a stretch. Yeah. You tell them chickens you're the smartest animal on the farm, huh?
You can teach a pig to sit. You can teach a pig to come. You can teach a pig the same types of things that people would teach dogs.
I actually had one on my farm that used to come up to the house, stand on its back feet, and open the door with its mouth and come in the house. Every time that hog, and we called it Piggo, every time it would come into the house, if my mother-in-law was there, she would leave. I never let anything happen to that hog. I had a very soft spot in my heart about that hog. I invited it up to the house often.
The reason that people connect with pigs here is because the pigs really like attention from people.
Oh, he's a adorable. Oh.
You can see it when the people are in there rubbing their bellies. They're just like grunt and groan in pleasure and roll over.
What do you think, Rufus? What do you say, Rufus? Oh, right there. Right there.
The biggest thing that I remember everybody always thinking about pigs is how pigs are dirty. Pigs, they ruin everything. They want to be completely filthy. And pigs don't have sweat glands, so they even tend to get hotter than we would. And so the pigs do enjoy mud baths because it helps cool them down. But in general, they keep themselves very clean.
You know when you got it good, don't you? Huh? Look at those jowls. You've been into the groceries too much. Yeah. Look at those jowls. Yeah.
And I guess the other common stereotype is you're a pig if you eat too much or you indulge too much. And the pigs do, you know, I would love to I would love to say that that stereotype isn't true, but the pigs do love all kinds of foods and they'll just eat about anything. But, you know, it's one of their endearing qualities, you know. It's the reason that pigs are so big and they get to be so fat is they're genetically manipulated so that they gain weight really quickly so that they can be slaughtered at a young age and people can eat them. But I think they probably still have a love for food. Our older pigs, we could feed them in the morning and, you know, everybody would come out to eat slowly and nonchalantly and it wasn't a huge panic rush. But these little pigs, when they first came, I remember going out with 2 buckets and the pigs swarming me, grabbing the buckets from me. I ended up on the ground trying to just get out. So we decided to lock them out while we put down the food. And so that's what we do now and it works a lot better. I mean, they're really, really vocal. They're telling us to hurry up. They're telling us, you know, we're starving. And we keep them locked off until we get all of the food down. And, you know, it takes us 20, 25 minutes to put all the food down, so they're all riled up.
All right, guys. Is it time to go eat? Is that what you're talking about? Huh?
So then when we open the gate, it's amazing. It's like a mad rush, but it's silent.
Probably the single most upsetting experience in my life was when I was about 5 or 6 years old and I saw the pig slaughter for the first time. I was too young to really know what was going on. All I can remember is that morning it was very busy around the place. People were coming in and parking in the yard and there was much of a scurrying about in the kitchen. And I stepped out on the back porch, stepped down the steps and saw dead pigs hanging from the tree, and it was horrifying. And the other thought I remember is looking down into these wash tubs that were full of pigs' heads and blood. And then I blacked out. And I don't really remember what happened for the next few days, but the family tells me that I freaked out, I became hysterical, and they had to take me to town and stay with my aunt for a few days. And then I had nightmares, and that I didn't want to come back to home. Didn't want to come back to the farm. Years later, I just kept reflecting and talking to other people that had similar experiences, and it just shows me that there's some basic humanity, some basic compassion, or some empathy that we all have. I don't think I was an especially sensitive kid. I don't think I was a special kid. I think maybe a lot of other farm kids had the same experiences and were never bold enough to talk about them.
Most of the slaughtering we did was on the farm, but occasionally we'd go, especially on weekends. There was a family-owned slaughterhouse in our area. It was the biggest one, and we would go there, and sometimes I would help out. I think they know way before then. They don't want to go. It's just because I think they know what's going to happen to them. Definitely when they get there, they can hear it. They can hear the cows, they're bellowing and stuff when they go in. It's a pretty awful sound. And they're getting prodded off in the trailer, and shock prods don't feel good. And they don't like it, and it makes them scared and anxious and afraid. And they start bellowing, and they hear the other cows, and literally in a big slaughterhouse, the screaming, it sounds like people. People ask me, how on earth could you have ever done that? And it's really hard, it's a very hard question to answer. How do you do it? How do you, kill an animal? How do you find it within yourself to kill it and butcher it? As time went by, you just realized that you needed to keep a certain amount of distance emotionally from the animals. So you trained yourself. It was a discipline like anything else, an emotional discipline. And I didn't break through that conditioning until I came to Farm Sanctuary. I have to admit, I thought a farm sanctuary, well, that's a pretty cool idea, but it's a pretty nuts idea. Because I thought, geez, you know how many millions of farm animals there are in this country?
This really is a global issue. As has been referred to, farm animal abuse seems so huge, seems so untouchable. But the reality of it is, many people can make a decision to not support it. And so that's what...
And right there on the spot after I listened to Gene's talk, I said, I have to adopt a cow. And my wife says, why a cow? That's the most expensive animal. And I said, I just have to. And I didn't really know. I couldn't verbalize why at that moment. So we went out there, and I found him, and his name was Snickers. He came here with his mother. She was a dairy cow that had chronic mastitis. Anyway, they brought Rosie and Snickers here. And when I saw him, he wasn't very big, and he was kind of skittish. He wasn't used to being around people. But he finally came up to me, and I fed him some apples, and we kind of hit it off, and I thought, this is really cool. And, of course, the other cows that have been here for a while, they're used to being petted, and I spent time with them, and I thought, this is great. And at that visit, I thought, this is not like any experience I've ever had on a farm or around cows. And it gave me something to think about. And it wasn't until a year later that it came back, and that's when it happened. All the cows were up in the barn, and Snickers was over in the far corner, and of course it's been about a year since I'd seen him. So I walk about halfway to him, and I look at him, and I say, Snickers, and I put out my arms, and it was unbelievable. He ran over to me, as much as a cow can run. He runs over to me, and he puts his head right in my chest. He just thumps me right in the chest with his forehead. And he just stands there leaning against me. And I just wrap my arms around his neck. And it was... I'm sorry. think that he knew just where to hit me. To kind of open me up to that part of me that had been closed off. Because after he thumped me in the chest, it was like he hit me right in the heart. And I knew right then that that's exactly what I'd shut off ever since I was a kid. I had this image in my head. The image was this big light switch right here. And that light switch had been off. And when he bumped me in the chest and just stayed there, I realized that I had developed this capacity as a kid to either turn it on or off. I could turn it on for my dog. I could turn it on for the people in my circle of compassion. And now I realized why I had to adopt a cow. And how Providence would have it, or whatever, that Snickers be that lesson giver, the one who made me realize how I was able to do that, to abuse animals at times when I lived on a farm, to kill them, to slaughter them, to eat them. I was just able to turn that off. And that's when my life turned around, big time, big time.
Rosie, how's my precious? Rosie, how's my girl? Huh? How's your udder doing, Rosie? Oh, are you getting an extra treat? Got your hay, huh? Alrighty. Break it apart, little. There you go. There you go, girl. There you go. Good girl, Garland. Good girl. This girl here is Rosie. And Rosie was used as a dairy production cow for about 5 or 6 years until she developed mastitis so severe. About half of the herds now in dairy production have chronic mastitis problems because they're forced to produce 10 times more milk than they would in nature. Rosie will always have a very large udder. At times it flares up and becomes infected. Had she, of course, not been rescued, she would have long ago been sent to the slaughterhouse, which is ultimately where all dairy cows go. They're not being retired to the green pastures. They are going to slaughterhouse. And in fact, dairy cows are what are used for hamburger in this country.
By and large, he's lived his whole life here. His mom was pregnant when they rescued her, and being a male, he would have been taken away and put into veal. You've got to keep a dairy cow pregnant to have her produce milk. She can't lactate unless she's pregnant. So as soon as she has her calf, you take the calf away because you need the milk for production, but the calf ends up as part of a veal. The veal industry exists because of the dairy industry. It's a byproduct of it. And the thing is there's some cases where those mothers will go dry for a while. They'll quit producing milk because they are in mourning for their calf. I have witnessed cows when the calves died on the farm. It amazed me that they could go for days just lowing and bawling and stuff for their calf. And they usually won't eat and they won't drink. And they will stay there until you bury it. The other cows would be supportive. They would walk with her. They would try to keep her with them. And why would, they do that? It's because they care about their own. And grieving, we kind of attribute that to us, to humans. We think we're unique because we can reason, we're rational, and we're also emotional. But cows are emotional too. I mean, they grieve. I've watched them grieve for their calves. I've watched them grieve for members of their herd that have been lost. There's a very strong bond. They have their own community.
falling through all the branches, don't know where I'll land, picking up all the pieces just like me. Now we've gone our separate ways. My mother and me. Catch me 'cause I'm falling out of my family tree.
They're kept in the dark in veal crates, and they're tethered at the neck so that they can't turn around, can't move. They're given a diet that's devoid of iron. And so there's a lack of exercise. They're kept anemic, so it keeps the meat white. And then when they're a little bit bigger, then they're sent to slaughter. A lot of times they can't even walk when they're taken out of the crates because they're so anemic. They've never had any exercise or anything, and they have to be dragged out.
Falling through all the branches, don't know where I'll land, picking up all the pieces, just might need a hand. Now we've gone our separate ways. My brother and me. Catch me 'cause I'm falling out of my family tree.
Hi there. How's everything in Bovineville? Huh? Can we get together and talk? Huh?
My name is Howard Lyman. I'm a fourth-generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator. And I travel around the world about 11 out of 12 months of the year, and I talk to people about the proper amount of animal products to have in their diet as being zero. People look at me and say, wait a minute, fourth-generation farmer, rancher, feedlot operator, talking about not eating animal products? You got to be smoking the #1 crop out of California. Ever since I was a small boy, I always had the greatest love in the world of the land, of the animals, to get up in the morning and the dew on the grass and to hear the birds singing. I thought it was the Garden of Eden, and the only thing I ever wanted to be in my entire life was a farmer. But I graduated from high school, and lo and behold, I found the farm was a business to be run, and I didn't have the tools to run a business. And so I decided to go to Montana State University and become an agribusinessman. 4 years of college, I learned a thing called better living through chemistry. And I went home and I took a small farm, an organic farm, and over a period of years I turned it into an operation where I had 7,000 head of cattle, 12,000 acres of crop, 30 employees. We'd bring the animals in and we'd put them in chute. We'd give them 7 to 21 vaccines, cut off their horns, castrate them, inject them with hormones, put them out into a pen and give them feed laced with antibiotics, because if you didn't give them antibiotics every day, you'd end up with a lot of sick, dead animals. On our feedlot, I've seen the flies so bad that you could reach out to grab them and end up with a handful of them. And so we would get up early in the morning when there was dew in the air, and we'd take a fogger with insecticides and drive up and down the feed alleys with a great fog of insecticide that would go out and it would drift over the cattle and over the water troughs and over the bunks. 2 hours later, we'd fill those feed bunks up. Cattle would go, eat them, lick the troughs, go to the water troughs and drink them. These were the things that I learned at Montana State University. These are the things that I thought were correct. But in the back of my mind, I kept seeing the birds die, the trees die, the soil change, and I couldn't bring myself to believe that even though I was buying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of chemicals, that I was responsible. And, you know, my brother died 29 years old. I believe today he died for the chemicals we were using on that farm. And it was not until 1979, at the time when I was at the top of my game, that I ended up paralyzed from the waist down. Now, it takes quite a rap on the head to get your attention, and I'll tell you, to be paralyzed from the waist down, that gets your attention. And here I am in the hospital where the doctor's telling me I've got 1 chance in a million I'll ever walk again if this tumor is on the inside of the cord.
There was a down cow left in the parking lot at the stockyard, and over the course of the day I went to other slaughterhouses in the area and did more videotaping, but I couldn't get the image of this cow out of my mind. So I went back at about 10 o'clock at night and called the police and said, you know, here's an animal that's obviously suffering, and she's been there at least 6 hours that I know of, probably been there a lot longer than that. And shouldn't she just be euthanized or provided veterinary care or something? And the cop told me there was nothing he could do. A downed animal at a stockyard could sell for as little as $1. And when that's the case, anything goes.
Went into the operating room and they operated on me for 12 hours. Took a tumor out the size of my thumb. I walked down to the hospital with a 1 in a million operation.
This footage came from a guy who actually worked at this slaughterhouse, and he was bothered by what he was seeing, and one day he actually went out there with a video camera and videotaped. This is an alleyway where there are probably over a dozen down cows just stacked on top of each other. This video footage was taken over the weekend, so these animals are just being left to linger.
You have to remember that I'd just been given the greatest gift in the world, the gift to walk again. And I can remember on my farm, shortly after the operation, I was in the bathroom and I was looking in the mirror. And it was one of the first times in my life that I actually got honest with myself. My entire life, I've always claimed to love animals. And I asked myself at that time, if I really love animals, if I care about them as much as I profess to, should I be eating them? I never saw an animal clicking its heels and going to the kill floor saying, "Yippee skippy, I want to be a burger tomorrow." I've been in hundreds of slaughterhouses. I've seen thousands of animals die. I knew, looking at those animals, they knew they were going to die. They saw what happened to the animal in front of them. They smelled the death that is there. Is there a need for that? I saw the fear in those animals' eyes, but I never allowed myself to really think about it until after I walked out of the hospital. And I will tell you that when I asked myself that question, I almost tore the sink off of the wall. I couldn't go and discuss it with my wife. How was I going to tell my wife that we had millions of dollars invested in an operation that was designed around feeding and killing animals? How was I going to say to her, maybe what we ought to do is get out of this business? How was I going to go and talk to my friends about it where every one of them was involved in doing exactly what I was doing? There was no support mechanism. Even if I went to my minister, here was a man that was eating animals just like I was. It was the most lonely, difficult time in my entire life.
They're beautiful. Need people over here, please? Because we're going to make a human chain with snow fencing, and we're going to just herd them in this way, because if I go in there, they're very, 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 very skittish of people. So if you guys could just take this all the way along the truck, the chickens can't. Good job, good job, good job. Excellent. And really all one needs to block off even is just that area. Perfect. They're so, I mean, they're beyond even, they're almost skittish. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is go in on the other side and then start shooing them out.
So, got some color.
Yeah, these weren't in the cages that long, which is why they have feathers still. All these birds came from one of the largest egg factory farms in the country. There are about a dozen or maybe up to 20 warehouses filled with approximately 100,000 birds in each warehouse, raised in the typical egg factory farm system. And the tornado hit in this area, and the buildings are basically partially demolished or fully demolished. And yet, there are still rows and rows and rows of cages with tens of thousands of birds still alive, without food or water, exposed without, of course, any shelter, any housing. And the cages are, in some cases, they're like twisted up, and the birds are, literally hanging almost like upside down and completely twisted. Other cages are just like caved in, and there's still birds trapped at the bottom. And it's, they've been in there like that now for, 6 days. These animals aren't worth anything at this point anymore.
apparently they must not have houses to put them into. You know, the ones that are older are just not worth it anymore. So now it's a disposal problem for them. And they're doing the easiest and quickest and most economical thing they can. I mean, it's an absolutely monumental, it's not monumental, it's an impossible situation. It can't be done. So it's, you know, this is actually one of the saddest rescues I've ever done in my life. Okay. Usually I'm ecstatic and happy, and this is one of my major coping mechanisms.
Oh yeah, we can fit another 25 in here, another 25 in the trailer. Yeah, we can get more. Because usually when we go in situations, you know, we are able to get out the animals that are suffering. You know, we're able to pick up the downed animal off the dead pile. And this time, you know, we can do that. So it's, as I said, it's really sad. I don't feel my normal elation and happiness and joy. It's just not there because, you know, I had to leave one behind that I couldn't get out of the cage. It was just all mangled and she was still alive. And I couldn't get her out, you know, and I just, you know, it's going to haunt me forever. And I can try to look at these happy faces, but she's still there. She and, you know, 500,000 other birds is what the guy said are still there. And I just can't feel happy.
What do you think, Lazarus? Huh? You want to put up with me? Huh? You want to put up with me? Huh? Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
John Newton was a slave ship captain, and he carried slaves in his ships from Africa, and he was an English fellow, over into this country to sell them. And during a violent storm, everybody went below, and of course the slaves were down in chains anyway. And I think John Newton was so afraid that everything was going to be lost, that the fear really struck him too. And it changed his life, and he pulled out a piece of paper and wrote the words to the song, Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
He later on gave up the slave ship trade and became a priest. And during the Civil War, when the English were supposedly go back to Southern armies, Amazing Grace became popular in England, and they withdrew support because of the slavery of the South, and it really changed the course of the war, the Civil War.
You're the nice guy. You're the nice guy. You know that. Yeah.
I've always loved the song, but I didn't know the story for a long time. And I think about the fact that if a captain of a slave ship could change, could write that song, which has touched millions and millions of people, can we not change? Is there any one of us that cannot make that journey?
I certainly think about civil rights. You know, I certainly think about those movements where, or even slavery, if you go back that far, any kind of liberation of any people, that, my God, I can't even imagine people who lived in it. I can't even imagine that they probably thought this would never end. It would never, ever end. And this is the way we're going to live and die. And similarly, I think that's what gives me some hope, that no matter how hard the road gets or how stormy it gets, you have to reflect on these things have happened before in other ways, and this can happen again. And there's no exact formula, but certainly one of the main ingredients is people pulling together and saying, you know what? We are not taking this anymore. We are not being a part of this anymore. We're not doing this, we're not supporting it, and we are in fact boycotting this whole thing.
Ah.